Welcome to my session about patient merge. Now I suppose after the lovely pep talk we just had, and that you suppose that I'm going to come and tell you all the answers about patient merge. No, I tell you all the questions. So patient merge is a problem that seems somewhat unique to healthcare. In all the clinical institutions that I've ever been in, clerical staff create duplicate records for patients. I have not found an institution where that is not true. The rate varies. Well, it varies depending on who you talk to. If you are a patient merge vendor, then the rate will be reported as anywhere up to 20%. And I was so surprised by that number that I actually quoted the link, the references to it. I've heard of institutions claiming 1%. The institution, back when I worked in healthcare directly as a provider, or in a provider institution, we thought that our rate was between 4 and 5%. The exact rate of duplicate records depends on your culture, it depends on your documented processes, it depends on your patient mix, it depends whether you have an emergency department. All those things make a difference to your actual rate. I saw an estimate while I was preparing for this that said that the cost of duplicate records was $2,000 an inpatient for a tertiary, complex tertiary hospital. ONC have published a target saying that you should get that down to 0.5%. What wasn't clear to me was that was 0.5% upfront or 0.5% after reconciliation. Because it's a common process that you see a patient come through emergency, triage, you go, I'm going to create them a record straight up. And later I'll worry about the paperwork. When we do like admission out of ED after if they're going to come in inpatient, and if they're just going to, we see them and roll them out, then it doesn't actually matter that much. We can reconcile it later in the Health Information Management Group. I didn't figure out whether the 0.5% was before or after that process. Because you don't need to slow down emergency to do good paperwork. So that was an open question for me, but I didn't spend that much time looking, so maybe it's really obvious somewhere in the ONC documentation. So you have specialist health information managers who spend their life finding and fixing duplicates. How many people here have actually done that job? Awesome, we have a few. It's actually really hard. It's much harder than you can believe. At one stage, I got a contract to do I got a contract to rebuild a PMI system for a state in Australia. And one of the things I did was I said, well, we're going to take the opportunity to do some duplicate reconciliation work. I had 650,000 patient records. I found 35,000 patient records where they only differed by case. And I looked at them and they said, nah. And then it turned out that one of the interfaces used a different case to the other, and then a third interface was case sensitive in its matching. So I said, well, we better merge those patients. And they said, we've got a data governance committee. That took 8 weeks to agree that it was too dangerous to merge those patients because they were different in the case of their name or their address. But man, it's easy, and it's easy to laugh about that problem, and that was clearly a wrong decision, but it is a really hard problem because you're looking at records, you're going, it's a female of marriageable age, surname is different, there's an overlapping address, but the date of birth is different. It looks like it could be a clerical typo on the date of birth. Is it really the same person? It's actually really hard. And then, of course, we believed in the hospital that I worked at that the fixed duplicates themselves had an error rate of 5%, which doesn't seem that unnormal, but it's much harder to get numbers on that. Published numbers on the rate of errors in fixing and merging records. They're much more serious when they happen. And of course, there's a related problem to this, which is encounters on the wrong patient record. So you actually create an encounter, but you accidentally create an encounter on the wrong record. That's a different kind of a record keeping problem. Now, it seems to me somewhat unique to healthcare. I don't have any formal experience outside healthcare. I have the pleasure, I think it's pleasure, of having worked in healthcare my entire life. But my ubiquitous experience is that when I run into a vendor, an IT vendor who's from outside healthcare, and they come and work in healthcare, and they discover this problem, they look at me blankly and say, merging records? What's wrong with you? And they never think of it being a problem. In fact, I'll tell you a story and then we'll get into the actual problem. I was summoned as a vendor, a CTO of a information systems vendor. My customer was a division within a larger enterprise, a tertiary care hospital, who was sharing data with another division who had just engaged a vendor to build them a clinical data repository. And they had come and asked my customer for an interface. And of course, they were going to get a version 2 interface. And they're like, version 2? And I'm like, well, this is going to be a fun discussion. And they're all busy trying to assure their own customer, my department's peer, that they are really good at what they're doing. And it was an all-day meeting. And around about just after lunch, I said to them, so what are you doing about patient merge? And they looked at me and said, patient what? And so I explained to them the nature of the problem. And then I explained to them the nature of the interface that we had between the hospital information management department, who were also present in the meeting, and my customer, and how that my customer got a regular feed of mergers and unmergers. And my customer says, no, we don't. And I'm like, you do, because I've seen the messages, because I looked after their messaging in person. And they said, yeah, we get them, but we ignore them because we see the patient, so we do our own mergers based on what we think, because the hospital's always wrong. And at this point, the hospital information management staff are like, we just discovered why our clinical data repository is full of crap data. That was the end of the meeting. They were sufficiently angry with each other, it degenerated into shouting very quickly. This is a hard problem. And to add to the evidence it's a hard problem, first of all, before I get into that, I need to talk about 2 different approaches to dealing with this. First is where, when you discover that you've got 2 records about the same person, it's okay, we have 2 records about the same person, we will continue carrying both records forward. We will just mark both records as about the same patient as the other record. So the 2 records point at each other, and HL7 has historically said that means they're linked. And then we expect that the applications will say, hey, by the way, you're looking at this patient has another record, click here to see the other patient record. And linking patient records is also useful where you've got federated record systems and you're actually pointing to the same record in a different system. The great thing about linking patient records is that when you link them and you're one of those 5% errors, you can just simply go, oh, no, and unlink them. The alternative is to merge the patient records. So you find 2 patient records about the same patient, say we'll pick one of them and call it the master, which we're going to carry forward, and we'll just move all the information from the old record to the new record and get rid of the old record or leave an empty record behind saying, record deleted, go see this other record. That makes for much simpler record keeping, but if it turned out that you got that wrong, now you have a real problem. You have a real problem. And I've sat in meetings, both in institutions and at HL7 over many years, where I've listened to the debate about which of those approaches is less worse than the other. And it's hotly contested, and there is some inputs into which is safer, and institutions may run with a mix. but that question will run through our work because institutions get very attached to their own choice on this matter. And you simply can't walk into an institution and go, by the way, you're doing this wrong. That's a not happening discussion. But if you want to see how complicated this is the HL7 V2 ADT message events relating to patient link and merge. And so see the ones I've got here that are greyed out, they're deprecated. We said they were so confusing that we just don't think anyone should use them anymore and replace them with more specific messages to be more clear. So we have link and unlink to link two records in the model I talked about. And we have merge person with patient ID and merge patient with patient identifier list. It's a bit unclear when you read the documentation how they're very different to each other in the V2 world. And we have merge patient, merge account, merge visit, merge patient identifiers, merge account and move account and visit number. You see that we've got a profusion of possibilities here. I do not know why, of all of the parts of a patient record, version 2 picked out account and visit as specially worth moving or merging, as opposed to the other possible parts of the record you could have. I presume that just reflects record exchange infancy in the past. If you look at the FHIR content model, which is much broader, you can see there's so many more places where we could have the same problem. That makes our life better. All right. So in FHIR, the first place we handle this is in the patient resource. We have a series of link elements on the patient resource. So each link specifies the target, which is another patient or potentially related person, and the type of the relationship between these two records. So the types of the relationship, and the idea is if you link two records, they will both link to each other. This is one of the few places in FHIR where we actually have bidirectional references between two resources. We avoid it like a plague because it's really difficult. But here you have a really difficult problem in itself, and so it seems appropriate. So resource A and resource B will reference each other. And you have to be really careful when you're actually retrieving them not to get stuck in a loop. And here's the definition of the codes for the relationships between the two resources. So the first two, replaced by and replaces partners. One will point to the other and say, that replaces me, and the other one will say, well, I'm replaced by. So the patient resource containing the link must no longer be used. And the link points forward to another patient resource to use in lieu of the patient resource that contains this link. So if you see a patient that refers forward to another patient, you know you should not use the patient resource anymore. How many apps that use the FHIR interface check for that field? Do you think? Nah, I don't think so. And then, of course, a link that says I'm a record that replaces the other link, you pretty much don't need to worry about that. That's just a historical notification thing. Well, then there's two others where you have a link forward to a resource saying this resource refers to the same patient, but it's not the primary patient record. There's other additional records that could be consulted. I was really troubled when I read this about the main source. I'm going to create a task for PA to clarify this matter. What would be the appropriate reverse reference? There's a PA editor over there. And then there's C also, which is that we just have two records that refer to the same patient and they're kind of peers and equals. But there's more to say about this that the definitions don't talk about. So those are the definitions. And the patient safety checklist. Oh, by the way, how many people have read the safety checklist in the FHIR specification? Oh, we're nearly at 10%. Awesome. There is a safety checklist in the FHIR specification. It is a list of all the things that we know that kill patients if you get them wrong. I recommend that you all read it, unless you want to kill patients. we put quite a bit of work into it over the years, and everybody ignores it. It's pretty frustrating because we know that this stuff kills people. And this is one thing that can create a great deal of confusion. Killing people doesn't arise out of a single mistake. It arises out of a cascade of mistakes. Mistakes in records that cause confusion are key enablers for clinical errors that kill people. Mistakes in records don't kill people, but they create the conditions that do kill people. The person resource has a similar relationship, but instead the kind of relationship is fixed. It's a C also, and we have little or no confidence through to very high confidence about the relationship that we're asserting. I presume the implication then on a patient resource is we only assert these relationships if we're highly confident about them. There's no documentation I could find about that. Now, when we actually talk about the multiple use cases, I've already talked about the multiple use cases with merge versus link. And then within link, as you show in the definition, there's primary versus equivalent, where one record is preferred and another where you don't make any assertion of that. But there's also person, which cross-links between people and is primarily detailed with concerned with federated identity assertions across multiple systems. And what we say about person is that it's for dealing with person registries as opposed to patient registries. So I'm going to ignore person from now on and only focus on patients. Then we also have a resource called the linkage resource. How many people have looked at the linkage resource? Great, hardly anybody has. That's awesome. Because I don't want you to look at the linkage resource, but it's a bit tricky. Here's another task coming for the system. The linkage resource claims that you use it for referencing between patients, but the patient page says don't do that. It would probably be useful if they were consistent. So that's work for us to do. But here's what the patient page documentation down the bottom of the patient page, which you've all read, of course, says that there's 3 different use cases. So here's another inconsistent set of use cases. So you see that confusion doesn't just arise in patient records, it arises in standards too. Duplicate patient records is where we have patient registration in error, okay, by using a link type of replace by, that's the one we talked about. The record containing such a link is marked as a duplicate and shouldn't be used anymore. The record that you point to, this could be nested. It could be a cascade before you finally point through to the current valid record. So you have to be prepared to keep chasing your tail. So alternatively, you could have a patient record in a patient index system, so we're talking cross-federated identity, that maintains a summary of patient data and list of one or more servers that are known to hold comprehensive authoritative record about the same patient. The link type refer is used to denote such a link. It's really good then that if you look at the definitions back here, that's what that says. Or not, as the case may be. So we certainly need to do some work on aligning those comments. And then finally, a distributed patient record, where we talk about C also. So you actually see that we're dealing with 2 different things. One is a system architecture issue and the other is a record consistency issue. So clearly, we have some work to do to get all our language aligned here. You'll see a bunch of tasks about this, Brian. Yep. And of course, the committees love debating this kind of stuff. It's be much fun for them. Okay, so you can see that there's 2 different problems. One is the fact that you have multiple systems tracking patients. In fact, you have multiple records in each of those systems. This is a hard problem. Wish I could give you an obvious, simple answer. But as a consumer of the data, you need to check to see if the record you are holding is currently marked as a current record. So when you create a record for a patient, maybe you're a client app, you connect to a patient, you connect to an identifier, and you get authorized to see the record, you should always check the patient record. Is this current record for the patient? In theory, of course, you would not get left holding a dangling record that's no longer current, because the healthcare system keeps really clean records and would somehow notify you. No, that wouldn't happen. Always check the record. And if you're an EHR vendor, yeah, well, I'm not going to bring you any joy here. All right. So, how do you merge patients? Well, when it comes to the API, this is what the specification says. Specification does not specify merge functionality. If multiple patient records are found to be duplicates, they can be linked together, as we just described, and they may indicate a master record, but the specification does not mandate the FHIR service migrate information. So we haven't really said very much here in the specification. And then we further muddy the waters by saying that health information administrators may call the process merging, but it is often implemented as linking at the record level. Now that's a kind of a get out of jail card where you play the get out of jail card and they let you out and you find that you're still in jail. Because the way that works is, so I did this. I implemented a system that worked exactly like this. So you have your real patient record links that maintain your original links, and all the way through every record that's linked to a patient has got a double link, a link to the current stated patient and a link to the original patient. So that after you merge the records, and then someone says, oh, that was a mistake, we'll unmerge the records, then you can unmerge the records. It's just a simple database or SQL operation to unmerge all the records. That's really, really good as long as there is no operations between the merge and the unmerge. But as soon as someone's committed new information to the database within the merge and the unmerge, you don't know where that information belongs. You cannot unmerge that. My personal recommendation, not that it has any meaning, any standing, is that at the point where you want to merge records, you scrub all the records and start creating new records by hand entirely from scratch. Of course, systems really don't let you do that. Servers are allowed to implement merging and record migration even though it's not mandated. So how would you do that? We'll come to that. So this is straight out of the specification. We are seeking input from the implementer community on what effect linking, merging and unlinking should have on other functionalities such as the get operation, searching, reverse includes, etc. I'm going to talk about them in a second. How should an unlinked behavior be done? How does the patient compartment interact with merge? Actually, how do you do merge? It's subject to ongoing experimentation and implementation testing. So I volunteered to do this session with the sole priority of encouraging that process. We are now at FHIR version 4. We stand on top of a whole heap of work in version 2 about patient merge and some work in XDS about patient merge, but we haven't nailed this down in the specification. We haven't explained to apps that consume on the Argonaut interface, which is a subset of the problem, what responsibilities they have in regard to patient merge and patient linking. It's becoming embarrassing. But there's no magic bullet by which we can just write the rules. We need the community to say, this is important to us. So what I'm hoping that we'll get is enough people here going, yeah, this is actually really important. We're going to contribute to a connectathon in HL7's Atlanta meeting when we have a connectathon about patient merge. I'll come back to that at the end of the day, end of my talk. Sorry. Because we need to sort this stuff out. And the only way that we can sort this stuff out is if people say we care and we're going to get involved. So let's talk about actually doing a patient merge. So imagine I am a client and I've decided that I want to merge 2 patient records. Now, very clearly we're not talking at this point about a patient-facing app. Nobody is going to let a patient-facing app merge patient records. But a clinician-facing app, that's what we're talking about now. It has an API access to the set of patient records owned by the institution. And it decides it wants to perform a patient merge. So it's going to update patient B to say it's replaced by patient A using the element structures we saw before. And we're going to update patient B to say it replaces patient, we're going to update patient A to say it replaces patient B. Sorry about that typo. And then we will find every resource linked to patient B and update it to fix it to say patient A. And that has many, many problems. You probably don't have the rights to all the resources for patient B, the rights to read them, let alone write them, but you probably don't have access to all the records associated with patient B. Any decent health information system will carry information not available at this time across the API. So you can't even reach those. And then, of course, you're talking about something that needs to be transactionally safe. You can't get halfway through this and then lose contact with the server, or the server crashes or the client crashes and leaves the records in a mess. We've got problems enough without adding that to the problem. And almost certainly this is a workflow. I've never seen an institution where it's not a workflow, where someone proposes a merge and a bunch of people have the opportunity to look at it and go, I don't think so. And then someone with authority goes, okay, it's had review, we're going to do it. I suppose smaller institutions have shallower processes, but in the institutions I've worked in, 400-bed hospitals plus, it's always a process with review. So you can't just go ahead and do it like this. So at the moment, there's no way for a app to initiate a merge. It could initiate a link, but even that probably needs to undergo review. So that implies that we should have a patient merge operation. It might look something like this: patient $merge, and then 2 IDs of patients from and to. Quoting from the prospective PA definition, this will copy data from the second patient record into the first and move referenced content from the second patient to reference the first. So the server therefore needs to go off and hunt down everything that you do or don't have access to and make all the changes and then bring it back. But this is just a draft on a wiki. I have the reference. If you're interested, I have the reference at the end of the presentation. What other parameters do we need? What do we need to say about encounters, episodes of care, accounts, coverages, any of the other resources? Do we need to say anything about those? Some of those in some systems are one-to-one with the patient record. Some of them are one-to-one with encounter records. Actually, by the way, which system would allow an app to commit a change to an encounter to change the subject on the encounter record? I've seen EHRs and PAS, patient administration systems, that say there is no such thing. You just kill the encounter and create a new one. And I've seen others that say, oh, you just make the change. And of course, the hospitals that run them are passionately approving of whichever decision they bought. It's really important to own what you do. So it could be argued that it's not needed, but because RESTful API doesn't have that much impact on the system. But we are seeing people bringing forward systems, CDRs and PASs and even EHRs entirely based on FHIR and other RESTful interfaces. So I think that we do need it, even if the real existing EHRs would never implement it because they would never allow that to happen on the RESTful interface. Does that mean that we need an unmerge operation with all of the problems I've already talked about? I don't know. We'll be seeking input from the community on that. Now, here we get to the really interesting questions, which are questions you have irrespective of whether you allow a merge operation. Let's say that we merged patient B to patient A. What would happen if you do a get on patient B? There's 2 obvious choices. Well, there's 3 actually. I put 2 here. The first obvious choice is to return a 404 not found. That patient's gone. You shouldn't be asking for it. That's an error. The second option is to return a 200 OK. Here's the patient, and the patient record is empty other than an assertion that this patient has been replaced with this other patient. Or you could back a 304 redirect that automatically redirects the client transparently to the user of the client that it's been redirected to a new patient, just get that patient record. If you are writing an app, it depends on your HTTP client and its settings as to whether you would notice that you had been redirected. Mostly you would not notice you had been redirected. You would just get the record that was different to the record you asked for. So let's do a quick survey in the room here. Of the three choices, I'm going to ask you to vote for one. A 404 not found, a 200 OK with a note saying this is no longer a valid patient, or a 304 redirect. Which do you think is the safest? And ask every one of you to vote. So hands up for a 404 not found. Okay, hands up for a 200 with a redirection notice. Hands up for a 304 redirect. So about even for all of them as to which is safest. The really great thing is operational FHIR interfaces are doing one of those three things today. So if you are writing a client, the first thing to do is check the ID of the patient you get back. Must do that. How many people do that? Yeah, thought so. One. Serious spender, good. Do that. Check, because you don't know what's going to happen. So should we fix how the behaviour? Oh, let's have a show of hands. Do you think we should fix the behaviour in this case so that it's predictable? Nah, slim majority. So the rest of you are voting for the behaviour to be unpredictable. I guess. All right. But then what about if you refer to the patient that's gone? Say I do a get observations and I ask for observations on a subject of the patient that's now been merged to the other patient. What's the correct behaviour here? I could return you no records and an operation outcome in the search saying, by the way, this patient's no longer valid. Or I could return you a 404 saying, well, you're a bozo because that patient's not valid. Or I could return, and you didn't check the patient record already, you should have. Or I could just go ahead and return you the records for patient A. Shall I ask the same set of questions or we get the same answers, right? Or we should fix this behaviour. But it's currently open subject for the committee. That's what the requests for information are about. If you have an opinion, the committee would like to hear your opinion. If you feel very passionate about this at the end of my talk, don't come to me. Brian, stick your hand up. Brian will be very unhappy to hear your opinions. But no, the committee does need to know what you think. And by the way, the link here, which is not named, but is a link that a link to my blog, a blog that I posted 3 or 4 weeks ago about synchronizing patient records from an EHR to a client app. How many people read that blog? Please, if you are writing an app or if you are writing an EHR that serves apps, go and read that blog. It details all of the things that can only the obvious things that can go wrong if the app is keeping a copy of the data that it gets from an EHR server off a FHIR interface. And I didn't even talk about patient merge. Please read that. And that will feed back into the safety checklist. All right, so where are we going? This is the subject of ongoing patient administration. If you're interested in their working page, that's the link to their working page. I quoted off it for some of this stuff. It's a mix of questions to the community and ideas about some steps to take this forward. We clearly have problems here, serious problems. I'm going to ask for a show of hands, see how bad this answer is. How many people here would be interested in taking part in a connectathon track to help us nail some of this stuff down? Well, that's a better answer than I expected. That's really good. I'm trying to push one of those at Atlanta. So that isn't it? Yes, Atlanta. I keep getting that wrong. Atlanta in September. So keep an eye out for that notification. I would like to hold a connectathon. If you've got any ideas about what that might look like to encourage the right kind of conversations, Brian's all ears. No, one of us is all ears. So yes, this is ongoing work, but the one thing that I say to all of you is this is really important and underappreciated. Confusion in records is often a precondition to genuine patient safety issues. It's never the cause, but it's a precondition. And I'm going to stop there and take questions and comments and abuse, if there are any. Yeah, Pascal.
One question. You didn't talk to Smart on FHIR refresh tokens.
Sorry?
Smart on FHIR refresh token, they are scoped for patient. What happens if these patients are merged? You could be on the right side, and this is your new master patient. You could be on the losing side, and you no longer have access to your patient's data.
Well, I can tell you that we don't have a predicted answer to that. Is anybody in the room a app provider who actually knows an answer to that for their own system? Rochelle, what are you going to say?
Mine was about creating a new record. And does that play into his question? Because if you create a new record, you end up giving a new...
Well, if you create a new record and you just point forward to the new record from the old records, then you're just recursing on the problem. My answer would be that you should blow the tokens just to make sure the system resets rather than tripping over in flight. I think that would be sounds like good advice to me. But I'm sure that would be a really good question to ask on Argonaut, the Argonaut track, and say, well, what does happen? And sorry?
Your identity is separate to the patient, so you should get a value back and then re-challenge to get the new identity. Identity will be the same, but the patient ID will be different.
Yeah, well, yes, it sounds like a great topic to have out on the Argonaut track. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned about, you were asking a question about should it be a 404, 100 or 304 after the merge.
Yep.
What's your opinion on that?
My first opinion is that we should have an answer, and it should be the answer that the community endorses. But my personal opinion, a 304 is a bad idea because 304s are routinely issued, or any other kind of redirects. They should be reserved for stack problems, like HTTP layer problems, not record problems. So I think it's a bad idea to do a redirect ever for a record keeping reason. You should be explicit at the record level and return errors or operation outcomes or patient records that tell you what's really going on. So I'm very much against using redirects personally. I don't know about the 202 versus 400, and that's its own long discussion. Yeah.
The systems I'm familiar with, typically there's some sort of a keychain that is used to essentially connect the various patient records. I'm unfamiliar with this area. I'm fascinated by it. I've worked on many master data management systems. Is Link analogous? Is the Link resource analogous to a keychain?
Well, I mean, this middle option here kind of is a different word for a keychain, pretty much. I mean, what I assume you mean by a keychain, which is one of these, maybe I'm just because I know what these are, but a typical, so I didn't mention it explicitly, but a typical enterprise will have an enterprise master patient index, an MPI, which is kind of what the middle option is. I didn't name it, but the function of an EMPI is to provide the services to the enterprise that let it function in the presence of all these problems, and which they are partially successful. From my point of view, it's really interesting actually. Increasingly, EMPIs are the interface engine of the institution. They were used to be an add-on to the interface engine in a totally separate business, but it's getting harder to function without a unity of those. And I think that a keychain is just a particular take on that. All right.
I want to understand why in the beginning you said that you would create a new record.
If you've merged two patient records and then you decide you need to unmerge them, you're really in a mess. And any work that's occurred between merging and unmerging is really, you've got two different patients whose records have come together. How do you know that any piece of information in the hospital is safe? So I think my personal opinion is that you should create two new patient identifiers and move everything to those new patient identifiers. Any information left hanging around the institution on the old identifiers is automatically suspect, returns to HIM to be forensically returned to its correct record. That's my view. But I mean, it's a serious mess when you get to that point. All right, time's up. Thanks for listening. Come and join the Connectathon.